Well, I am super excited to be joined by explorer and landscape photographer Abbie Warnock-Matthews, who lives in Utah and specializes in exploring the many ancient petroglyph sites of the region. When I saw your photo of these, what you call dry fork petroglyphs, especially this figurine we're going to talk about that is known as the Bigfoot, I
hmm
was floored. We're going to be talking about many of these ancient rock art sites in Utah specifically, and maybe in other states that you visited. I want to talk about the strange figurines, especially that are depicted at these sites, how old they might be, who might have made them, and what these strange depictions might have represented.
It's been a lot of fun to find them all, and I don't think I'll ever see them all. And it's funny because I go out and look for them, and when you're online, you kind of become your online community, and you assume that everybody's seeing the same stuff as you, except I'm part of these rock art nerd circles where we all know about these panels, but when outsiders come in and see them, it blows them away, where they're like, where is this? Why is nobody talking about this? There are so many, and they are a lot of them are easily accessible. A lot of them are actually built pretty close to the I-70, because they ended up running the interstate right through that area. So there is a lot that is easily accessible where you can park your car and walk to them, and people drive right past and don't know they're there. But I would say that the rock art panels in Utah are in the tens of thousands.
First, for those who might kind of be new to this topic of ancient rock art, can you educate us a little bit? Just because I know there's going to be some words you throw out that might fly over some of our heads, like what's the difference between a petroglyph and a pictograph? And then I know you use the word anthropomorphic a lot. Tell us what that means, and then panel. Basically, what's that mean?
Sure. So, if we're going to get into the difference between petroglyphs and pictographs, it's a pretty simple explanation. Pictographs are painted on a surface with a pigment and usually with a brush. A lot of times they would mix, available minerals with something like tree sap or animal fat. They would mix it all together, and then they would end up painting that on the rock surface with fingertips or with pine bristles and things of that nature. And then petroglyphs are pecked or etched into the rock surface itself. This can be done using a chisel or just another rock. One thing I will say about petroglyphs, especially in this area, is that whatever they were using to etch them into the rock is so impressive, because from time to time you do run into panels that have been vandalized by other people. And just the scratchings of other people in modern times don't even come close to what these people were capable of doing, and how deep they etched these into the rock and how they cut through the desert varnish to do it. It's incredible. It's really impressive. Um, and then obviously, some people have also asked, what's the difference between a petroglyph and a hieroglyph? And a hieroglyph is a relief carving where they actually remove all of the rock around the image to make a 3D surface, like the ones in Egypt or Peru or Mexico. And there are a couple of examples of hieroglyphs in Utah, not many. Most of the time it's the outline of the shape that is made, but there are a couple where there are reliefs of a really big figure set inside where they have removed the stone. But again, really rare.
That's
I
like
just don't think
breaking
they have the right
news.
tools.
There's hieroglyphs found in Utah.
Right? I mean, hieroglyphs in the fact that they're
Right,
relief
right,
carvings,
right.
but nothing near as intricate and smooth and polished as the stuff you'll find in Egypt. But they do exist, and there are even some, on this ranch in Vernal that we're going to talk about.
I definitely want to ask you about several specific sites on that I've seen on your Instagram account. I want to start off asking you about these dry fork petroglyphs.
Sure.
I think you pronounce it Utah's. Is it Uinta Basin?
Yeah, that's a big one for outsiders. It's the
Did I say it
Uinta
right?
Basin. I've seen people that are like the Uinta, and I'm like, you're giving us too much credit. We're just a bunch of simple cowboys out here. So the Uinta Basin is actually named after the Ute tribe that still resides in
Okay.
that area. There's a Ute reservation out there. There's an Ouray reservation out there. There's Paiutes out there. So
Okay.
that's what the area is named for.
Okay. I see, all these photos of these famous petroglyphs, like you mentioned, the ones ancient aliens have made famous, and is it Sago Canyon?
Hmm.
But nobody had ever showed me this guy of this. Basically, I don't want to blow it yet, but the six-fingered
Hmm.
Bigfoot. Just break it down for us. Tell us what makes these so unique, bizarre, and weird compared to a lot of those that people have seen. These they haven't seen.
So the rock art in the Uinta Basin is referred to as classic vernal style, and Vernal is a prominent town up in the Uinta Basin. It's probably the biggest city, and it's just outside of Dinosaur National Monument and near between the towns of Roosevelt and Jensen on what is that highway? I think it's the 40 that goes through there and then it ends up going, up to Wyoming or into Colorado. It's just up in the northeastern corner. And classic vernal style often contains large anthropomorphic figures, like a lot of other rock art in Utah. They have trapezoidal shaped bodies, they have round, triangular, or bucket shaped heads on average. And they typically have some kind of headdress on, as well as a lot of embellishment across their chests and their shoulders. That's an indicator of classic vernal style. And the vernal style petroglyphs are part of the Fremont culture. The Fremont culture was after the archaic culture, and it was divided up into a couple of different regions of Utah where they were all part of a larger culture, but they definitely had different bands that were doing their own subcultures during that time period. And up in the Uinta Basin, they were called they call them the Uinta Basin Fremont people. And there are multiple styles of this rock art throughout the Uinta Basin, and you can find it in Dinosaur National Monument. It's along the banks of the Green River, but there is a collection of it outside of the town of Vernal, in a place that's referred to as Dry Fork Canyon or Ashley Creek. That's oftentimes the name that is given to this area of rock art. But a lot of it is located on private land, ranches and farms and people that have been there for literally generations. And because that's the case, a lot of it is inaccessible. However, one of the landowners back in the 70s decided they wanted to open up their property to the public because they had been dealing with trespassers and they were afraid that, if people found out this was there but didn't have permission to go, they would just go anyways. And if they weren't, fostering some kind of stewardship for it, they were afraid that the panels would get vandalized. So it's called McConkey Ranch, and the landowners actually got it made into a Utah State Historical Site back in 1975 because they wanted to preserve it and protect it. So when you go to this place, it's just outside of the town of Vernal, and you can park in a public parking lot, and they have a cute little log cabin that's set up where you can go in, sign the registry, make a little donation. There's a refrigerator full of bottled water if you need something for the trail during the summer heat. They're really sweet. And the mere fact that it is open to people is just incredible. But, once you get in and, pay your little due and go up the trails, you go up to these cliff faces where all of this incredible rock art is. And it's hard to even describe it. It's unlike anything else you have ever seen. And, which is why it caught your eye when I first posted stuff online. It's multiple trapezoidal shaped anthropomorphs, but they're completely unique to other things in the area in that you have not only this Bigfoot panel that we're going to get into, but you also have something that is not in other rock art panels anywhere else in Utah that I have personally seen, and that is figures of people standing inside these circular shapes. And, archaeologists have commented that, oh, they must be shields. They're holding shields. But when you look at the rock art, they're not standing behind a solid mass. They are standing inside of this circular shape. It almost looks like they're coming out of a tunnel or out of a portal or something. It's
Right.
really unique to the area, and I haven't seen any other rock art like that anywhere else in the state. Um, Along with these portal figures, you also have a really unique set of figures that are holding severed heads. And, head hunting is something that archaeologists talk about being, present during ancient times, but this is kind of the only depiction of that kind of behavior or activity that is in any of the rock art in Utah. And it's pretty intense. They are holding
Yeah,
these
it is.
heads, which have been streaked with pictograph paint, where there is actually red blood flowing out of them, and they have pecked tear stains down their faces. And it's not one or two of them. I mean, there are multiple severed heads on this panel. And it could have been an indicator that they were a warlike people, that they were fighting with neighboring tribes. There isn't really any other indications of that in Fremont rock art other places, but it is possible that it's just that they were a warring people, but it's hard to say. But among this group of bloody and chaotic figures is what has become known as the Skinwalker Ranch Bigfoot, which is the panel that I posted that you saw. And to describe him, he has 6 fingers on each of his hands, and he appears to be next to a severed head that's next to his elbow. And he has a large bucket-shaped head. He appears to be smiling, and he has 2 massive feet. They are as wide as his entire body with his outstretched arms. And typically on rock art panels, especially Fremont rock art panels, you're lucky to get depictions of feet at all. Oftentimes they are just, tall, ghostly anthropomorphic figures that don't have feet, but these are huge, and he's the only one of his kind. There are not any others like him. And aside from the giant feet, he also has a really unique long spear that is coming down through his body, like through the shoulder area. And you don't see that anywhere else on these panels where he's located either. Totally unique, his own deal. So the fact that he appears to have an appendage between his legs leads me to believe that he was deemed immortal. So oftentimes in these panels, especially with the spirit figures, when they don't have arms or legs, it's kind of the agreed upon point that they were spirits or interdimensional beings, or as ancient aliens would call them, they were extraterrestrials. But anytime there is a person with arms and legs, it's usually depicted as being either the shaman who was conducting the journey or one of the tribe members, a mortal being. So the fact that he has arms and giant feet and a penis leads me to believe that he was a flesh and blood person or creature or something that was among the tribe. So, with that, I'm sure that some of your followers are probably thinking about the fact that, polydactylism and the 6 fingers is a legend that's, prominent throughout different parts of history on different continents. There are legends in the Middle East of an ancient race of giants that possessed polydactylism, and polydactylism means they have extra digits, extra fingers, extra toes. And there are legends of a red-haired tribe of giant cannibals in the Paiute tribe in Nevada, which was also given a lot of attention by ancient aliens back in the day. None of the remains that have ever been found there have, proven that there was a polydactyl group of giants living there, although some people claim that's a cover up too, so I don't know enough about it to say. But the Navajo tribe down to the southwest of Utah also has, legends of 6-toed cats and other supernatural beings that possess polydactylism, 6 digits. I find it interesting that the Bigfoot character on this panel has 6 fingers on each hand, but he appears to only have 5 toes on each foot. So I don't know what that's about, but
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was just so fascinated by these petroglyphs as a whole because, um, first off, tell me if I'm right in this. These are not only petroglyphs, but like you said, they also are pictographs in a sense where they've got the painted blood. So that kind of makes them special that they're both.
They are.
It's kind of like extra work went into this when you look at, I mean, when I'm looking at these petroglyphs, very detailed. Like you said, the severed heads have chiseled out like teardrops.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it looks like on the Bigfoot figurine, he's got some kind of necklace around that almost it kind of looks 3D in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then so they're very colorful. It's a petroglyph pictograph combination.
Mm-hmm.
You've got these guys coming out of these circles or orbs. Like you said, they don't look like shields to me because it looks like they're coming out of them. So that's very
Right.
fascinating. And as
You
I look
know,
at you,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, I know. And then you've got again several of them holding severed heads. So I mean, it's like these are headhunters, and then some of them appear to have horns.
Mm-hmm.
And what other crazy? Okay, and then in one photo, it shows it's like it's the biggest collection of a group of these figures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on the kind of near the top, they're very large, and one's got a head in the middle, and then near the bottom, they're smallish. Do you think this is adults and children, or might this be hybrid type giants and normal humans below them?
I mean, it's anybody's guess. Anything's possible. I will say that as far as depictions of children go on these panels, they are rare. A lot of times you will find ceremonial pictograph and petroglyph panels that contain things for fertility, where they're looking to, bear a child. There's even depictions of, there's a panel down in Moab called the birthing panel, where it's actually a depiction of a woman giving birth to a baby in breech, and you can see the feet coming out. But as far as, just depictions of children on the panels, they're not very common.
That's okay. That's interesting to know because as I look closer now at this one I'm referring to,
Mm-hmm.
the figure on the bottom right actually looks very. It actually has horns. I mean, pretty pronounced, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
guess that wouldn't be a child. So again, maybe this is some kind of depictions of a giant. So back to the Bigfoot guy,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you point out. I know on the one hand he definitely has six fingers. I couldn't tell on the other for sure, but you're confirming that it sounds like.
It appears that he does have six fingers on each hand.
And you make the point that a lot of the kind of the tall, limbless depictions, might represent a godlike entity, whereas those that have appendages are likely human. And then you mentioned, the polydactylism. Again, that takes me back to um, my studies into Genesis 6. The Bible even talks about this ancient race of giants and even
Mm-hmm.
mentions polydactylism. And then I was just interviewing Dr. Gregory Little. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's one of the foremost experts on the ancient mounds of America.
Oh, cool.
And he's done research with man, he's written so many books on this, but he's gone through all the Smithsonian publications and all the photos. He kind of like what you do with these petroglyph photos on your Instagram, he does on Twitter with all of the old Smithsonian photos. He's
Oh, wow.
documenting all the mounds and the artifacts found in the mounds.
Mm-hmm.
And his conclusion is pretty insane. It's that um thousands upon thousands of years ago, whether it was 8,000 or 10,000, when these mound building culture was thriving,
Mm-hmm.
the basic civilization was primitive, but the ruling elites were these 7 to 8 foot tall peoples
Oh, wow.
that he says are related to the Denisovans, from Denisova, the cave where they found
Mm-hmm.
these massive molars.
Wow.
So he says he does believe there was this race of giants, if you want to call them that, at least
Mm-hmm.
7 to 8 feet, that seem to have ruled over the rest of the masses. So that makes me go to at least these petroglyphs with the dry canyon, the Bigfoot,
Mhm.
could these have been the ancient people's depictions of some of these elite rulers? And I like how you asked that question in your Instagram post and our article. Are
Mhm.
these like a warlike tribe, or might this be some kind of, ruling elite, godlike demigod entities, right?
Yeah, some kind of a worshipped, a little bit higher up the chain than the rest of the village.
Yeah.
um, I know that, there are legends of the giants and things like that coming out of Nevada. And as far as Utah is concerned, I haven't really heard, much of anything about it except for this panel where this guy is clearly just unique and on his own. And we were kind of talking about it before we started recording. As far as all of the rock art textbooks go, they all talk about the Dry Fork Canyon area because it is so impressive. I think the Smithsonian said it was the most impressive display of rock art in North America, and they're not wrong. But I found it very interesting that in these texts, nobody mentions the Bigfoot panel. They talk about all of these others, and it could be something as simple as the fact that when you're writing a textbook on rock art, you're kind of looking to quantify things. You're looking to categorize things. So it's, when you read them, they're very dry, they're very academic, and they're talking about, 14% of panels contain a person with this kind of headdress, and 70% of panels will contain, anthropomorphic figures with horns, and 4% of the panels contain a Cocopelli kind of figure that's playing a flute. And it could just be that because he's so unique and he's such a one-off, they don't bother mentioning him. But it is interesting to me that he hasn't gotten the attention that I kind of feel like he deserves, because he
Right.
is so unique and he is so rare, and there's nothing out there really like him. Wanted to bring up the fact that, because you're familiar with Skinwalker Ranch, Skinwalker Ranch is located only 30 miles as the crow flies from this rock art panel. And
Wow.
they
Okay.
have found rock art on the property. I haven't been keeping up with the show. There's a show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, on the History Channel, and it's not because of lack of interest. I've just been raising a kid and haven't had time for a lot of TV, but I follow the owner on Instagram and kind of keep tabs on what's going on out there, just because I did read the book back in the day and it's a fascinating topic. But they have found rock art out there. And one of the craziest stories that's come from that area was from the original owner in the 1990s, who said that, one day he had a guy stop by the property who, if I recall, he was like drawn to the property. He just wanted to go there and he wanted to meditate and he wanted to have, some time. And, being a cowboy cattle rancher, the owner at the time, who they call Tom in the book, which isn't his real name, Tom was kind of like, okay, you can come in. And as the man sat down to meditate out by the homestead on the property, Tom saw something out of the corner of his eye and couldn't really tell what it was, but there was like a blurry mass that was making its way across the field toward this man who was meditating with his eyes closed. And he couldn't find the words to describe it. He was like, it was tall, like 9 feet tall, but it was almost as if it were cloaked. You could see this mass moving almost like a weird mirror reflection or something that was going through the field. And it was coming up on this guy fast. And when it got to the dude, I think Tom might have even called out like, hey. And at that point, whatever this thing was let out a roar that Tom described as like being a mix between like a lion and a bear, and had no explanation for what it was, but it took off running. And this guy that was meditating in the field fell to pieces, said like this intense feeling of fear and dread washed over him, and he had to get out of there. But there are also other stories from that property of these strange portals opening up and people seeing like crazy black hairy creatures crawling out of them. I don't know, and any time that anything has ever come up, as far as what I've seen, it's been pretty grainy and blurry footage. It's obviously hard to document, but these stories are out there, and it does make me wonder if it is one of these things where if there is some kind of paranormal activity going on out there where you have some kind of rip in the sky or, a dimensional rift where things can come and go, would that apply to something of this nature, something giant? And in fact, I think in the book later on that year, the owner of the ranch was watching the movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And when it got to the part where it was like the predator was cloaked and in the forest, he kind of did that Leonardo DiCaprio, like, like, that's it. That's what I saw. And he told everybody, like, that was what I was looking at. It was just this weird mass that was booking it across the property. And it was 9 feet tall, but I don't know what it was. And it was like cloaked in something that couldn't let me see it. So you get these wackadoodle stories out of the Uinta Basin, and I don't know what to make of it, but I find it very interesting that, that property is only 30 miles away, and McConkey Ranch has ancient depictions of people coming out of circles and strange big-footed creatures and warring people that aren't anything like anything else in the Fremont culture as far as the rock art's concerned. And, there are grave sites where you'll find, mass graves of people that were murdered during warfare between tribes, where one tribe showed up in the middle of the night, killed the entire village, threw them in a pit, and then took off. Those kind of stories are here, but it's nothing like what's depicted in the Uinta Basin.
Yeah,
Nothing.
that's so fascinating. I think that's a very important point to make, that Skinwalker Ranch is literally 30 miles from these petroglyphs, where you've got this strange depiction of this entity or figurine with these massive feet, like you said,
Yeah.
as wide as his arms go out on the sides.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 6 fingers. He's got, now, do you think this is a fancy hat, or might this be an elongated skull with horns?
So I think that the top part, the bucket portion, is his head. But as far as the rays, that the lines that are coming out the side, those are often depicted as rays of light on other panels, where it's meant to show like a beam coming from behind them.
Hmm.
Especially, Barrier Canyon rock art has a lot of that, where it's a really tall, crazy, anthropomorphic spirit, godlike figure, and then they will have rays coming out like it was
Okay.
engulfed in light. So
Okay.
when it comes to the Bigfoot, I think that the bucket portion is his head, but I think that the rays on the side are probably depictions of light coming from behind him.
So in a weird way, that gets me even more excited that you think the head is actually elongated and not just some fancy hat or headdress. So we could possibly have a big-footed, 6-fingered, elongated skull depiction of this figurine 30 miles
Mm-hmm.
from Skinwalker Ranch. And so again, where my head goes is, was the ancient artist who made this depicting what he saw, or maybe what his ancestors even said they saw according to their oral traditions? And again, might
Mm-hmm.
this be depicting some kind of hybrid demigod from the old world? For those who follow the Nephilim from Genesis 6:4, the Bible basically says they descended, they were on the earth in those days and also after the flood. So did they also descend on this side of the world at some point? Or like you said, might they have come through some kind of portal or stargate, again related to this strange region in Skinwalker Ranch? So it's
Sure.
crazy to consider. And I also wanted to ask you about one figurine, and you're gonna have to remind me. I know it's a Barrier Canyon style,
Mm-hmm.
but it's this guy, this depiction that looks almost like a bug with
Mm-hmm.
antennas, and his arms are off to the side, and it's like he's shooting something. Tell
Mm-hmm.
us about that.
So this is a panel that I have been dying to see. This panel is very unique in that it's a Barrier Canyon site that was not even documented until about 11 years ago. So it doesn't appear in any of the textbooks. It's not in any of the old archaeological information about Barrier Canyon rock art. And it contains a couple of things on this panel that are so strange. Um, the one that you're talking about with the antenna, and he looks as if he's almost like shooting something out of these long claw-like hands. Um, he is a figure that is a little bit common in that area, in that there are creatures like him found in other panels nearby. In the past, there's another prominent panel that's up by the I-70 near the San Rafael Swell called the Head of Sinbad. And the Head of Sinbad is a very similar creature where they have, kind of these googly bug eyes and antenna, and they often are depicted with some kind of an animal spirit helper. And, on the Head of Sinbad, it's like a small little dog figure. And on this panel, it almost, I'm sure it's some kind of dog or something. It almost looks like an armadillo to me, although those are not in Utah, so, hard to say what that means. But this panel is about 5 miles into the San Rafael Swell, and you have to, hike up a wash, drop down into another canyon. It's really remote. I ended up finding it because a four-wheeler blog had posted GPS coordinates like, hey, look at this cool thing we found while we was out four-wheeling. Ain't that crazy? And when I saw it, it blew my mind. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I mapped out the route and couldn't go because I was pregnant when I found it, and had to wait until my daughter was a little older. So she's 3 now. And we actually went down there and found it for the first time this month. And when you come up on this panel, it has a couple of things going on. So at the top is this bug-eyed creature with antenna, and he looks to be shooting like comets out of his hands. And, some archaeologists say that, like stuff like that is birds, but there are birds on other panels. There are crows, there are owls, there are ravens. They look nothing like these shapes. So he's shooting something strange out of his hands. And they do almost look like comets or balls of fire, which is interesting in and of itself. And then off to the left of him is another tall anthropomorphic spirit figure with no legs, no arms. And he's got a snake and a couple of like leaping sheep near him. And then at the bottom of the panel, you have another big, tall anthropomorphic figure that appears to be, it's almost as if his body is raining. It looks like falling rain. But below that creature, in the middle of this panel, is something so strange, so unique. I haven't seen it depicted in any other sites, and it just blows my mind. So, if I can geek out on that for a minute, I'd love to. The figure, the one that's in the middle of the panel is a half circle, which has roaming four-legged, like quadruped beasts inside of it. And it's got little circles inside of the panel. And it looks like it almost has an atmospheric layer. So there's a half circle, and then there's another layer of circle on top of that has been filled in with white. And then above this sphere that has roaming beasts inside of it, there are 2 free-floating figures that have domes over their heads and some weird circle below their feet, almost as if they're hovering on top of like some kind of a ball. And there used to be 3 figures, but the third figure has washed away because it's actually in a rain runoff channel on the rock. And they've been there for so long that every time it rains, the mineral deposits wash down the face of the rock and have eroded away the third one. And then, one of these figures is holding what appears to be a staff that is piercing down through the atmosphere or the membrane of this half circle. And there's other strange squiggly lines that are going into the sphere that almost look like lightning. There's a physicist out there who claims that it is really similar to a plasma burst, which is something that he believes a lot of rock art depicts in ancient times, as if there was a solar flare so large that it actually enveloped the entire earth, and all of these ancient people were depicting this massive solar flare and all of this plasma activity that was happening in the upper atmosphere at the time. That's another story. But, this figure of this this half circle with the beings and this, the spear that's piercing through it. It's unlike anything else I've ever seen, and it is
It's wild.
absolutely incredible to me. So the reason that I love it so much is because to me it almost feels like it is a representation of the macro and the micro simultaneously. Because when I posted this, I had other people reach out that were like, I know you think this kind of looks like a planet and an atmosphere, but to me, it really looks like a cellular membrane. And that looks like mitochondrion inside a cell. Like you're looking at DNA. And I went, oh, really? So the fact that, it could be a representation of something viewed from space, or the fact that it could be a representation of something viewed under a microscope, and it was depicted on a rock surface anywhere from 1400 to 4000 years ago, blows my mind. It's the craziest thing, and it's something where Barrier Canyon rock art is nuts in and of itself, and it's very shamanic in nature. So it does lead me to wonder, was Barrier Canyon rock art something where they were on hallucinogens and were experiencing things like this? It makes me think of the story of what's the name of the doctor? The doctor who basically discovered DNA made a confession in his old age to his wife, like before he passed away, that he was like, I need to tell somebody. When I first saw the double helix structure of DNA, I was high on LSD. And his wife was kind of like, oh, okay, great, interesting. And there are a lot of people that have engaged in psychoactive drugs that have talked about seeing things that they don't comprehend, that they don't understand, but that have to do with a much grander scale than where they're at. So this is a kind of panel that really did make me say, like, okay, what were these people privy to? What were these people experiencing? Was this something that was brought on by hallucinogens or trance states, altered states of consciousness? How did they know to make this? And what is it? Because no matter what it's a depiction of, it's wild. It's just wild. Um,
Yeah,
so
my
it is one
first
of those things where it just makes me more curious. I don't know.
yeah, when I see this and I just, kind of focus my eyes on it for a few seconds, the word that first comes to mind is genetics. Is
Hmm.
this some kind of genetic breeding program that's depicted here? That looks like some kind of, what do you want to call it, womb or something, where they're breeding something, they're growing something, because there's clearly what, one, two, three, four, five uh creatures inside this
Hmm.
sac, or again, membrane, whatever this is.
Yeah,
What do you think those creatures might be? Do they look like chimeric? Are they animals?
they do look a little bit chimeric. If you zoom in on them, a lot of their faces have either been, worn off throughout the hundreds of years that they've been sitting on this rock face. But the one on the far right, you can zoom in on that face, and it is a little bit human. It doesn't look like anything we have on Earth, at least. It doesn't look like any creatures that we currently have. Um, the lightning bolt that seems to be penetrating through the membrane also, reminds me of the sperm and the egg. It's very, it reminds me of an egg and fertilization and things like that. So, I've talked with other people about the fact that maybe this is a depiction of directed panspermia, which is a popular theory with people who are into aliens, where, there's a theory out there that we arrived on Earth through the form of comets, or were actually mindfully seeded on planet Earth by another race of people. So it's something that conjures up curiosity about that topic for me. I just don't know, but
And
when
there's got to be people too that are going to see this and go, "Man, that's got to have something to do with alien abductions." When you see the one figure holding something,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I'm going to get that comment at some point.
Of course. Yeah, it's wild. And there are other strange ones down there. Another theory that actually I wanted to talk about this with you because it sent me down the biggest rabbit hole. We posted a collaborative video together on Instagram just recently of that Bigfoot figure up in the Uinta Basin. And somebody named Dave commented on that video and said, "Hey, have you looked into the works of a plasma physicist named Anthony Peratt?" And I said, "I've never even heard of this guy. What's he into?" And he said, you need to look him up. He's got some published papers. You can find him on academia.edu. But basically, he's a plasma physicist who got a look at ancient rock art, after he was well into his career, where he was doing tests in laboratories behind, 10 feet of lead to make sure nobody was getting radiation. And they were doing all of these studies as to how plasma reacts under various conditions. And he said that a lot of it ended up reminding him of these ancient petroglyphs that he was being shown by a friend. And he said, "Where did you find these?" And the guy said, "It's just rock art. It's everywhere." And he said, "When were they made?" And he said, "Thousands of years ago. They've been around forever." So that sent Anthony down a rabbit hole where he ended up investigating rock art from, multiple continents all over the world and finding that there were these similar shapes that were taking place on all of these panels. And for him, with his, with all of the smarts he has about plasma physics, he basically was under the impression that at some point in ancient times, a high current Z-pinch plasma toroid aurora occurred in the upper atmosphere of the Earth that mimicked or displayed the same way that Z-pinches display in plasma stability and instability data when they're doing tests in the laboratory. And he suggested that the occurrence of an intense aurora that may have been produced if solar winds had been increased between 1 or 2 orders of magnitude in ancient times would have made this intense aurora that enveloped the entire Earth in this phenomenon. And it would have been something that all of these ancient cultures, especially along a certain latitude degree around the center of the Earth, would have been able to see if their village had a view of magnetic south in the sky. And after going into some of his work, it blew me away. And a lot of the shapes that he was referring to and the different petroglyphs from Australia, from Europe, from Africa, from Arizona, from New Mexico, match a ton of stuff you find on panels in Utah. So that just, sent me on this wild goose chase just this week where I was like, I don't know what to do with this. This is wild. And because my ADHD brain is all about trying to make correlations constantly, it also made me think of another experiment that maybe you're familiar with. Have you ever heard of the God helmet?
No.
So there is this apparatus that was used and was being studied in the 90s. And I forget the name of the scientist. I really should look up his name. But there was an apparatus that a group of scientists had made where it was kind of like a crash helmet that had an electromagnetic coil wired inside of it. And they were trying to do studies on the temporal lobes of humans and how the temporal lobes would be affected if they were introduced to very mild electromagnetic currents. And so they would bring people into a room and they would put this helmet on them. They would turn off the lights. They would blindfold them. And then they would fire up this magnet to see how it altered their brainwaves, they would live narrate their experience to the scientists for the data. And a huge percentage of people that ended up doing this study claimed that once they fired up that magnet, they could sense presences in the room. They could feel dead relatives nearby. They were visited by what they called angels. Some people said they were visited by aliens. Like, everybody came out of that experience saying, I felt something. I felt what people perceived to be as God when you fired up that magnet. And it got me into this mindset of, okay, if people in ancient times were experiencing some kind of solar flare that enveloped the entire Earth in an aurora borealis that intense. And that kind of electromagnetism just blasted the Earth all at once. What was it doing to those people's temporal lobes on that level? Is that something where they were all having a mass hallucination and they were experiencing these spirits? Did they think they actually saw them? Or would something like that actually have the power to lift the veil between dimensions where they were seeing things that they couldn't explain, that had not been there before, but now clearly were? It's just, I get sucked into all these crazy tangents and it all just makes me endlessly curious. But these kind of panels end up stirring up those kind of thoughts for me.
No, those are wild theories
I
and
can't.
incredible to think about for sure. I definitely wanted to ask you before I forget about another petroglyph, and this might, again, this is a Barrier Canyon style, you say, and it
Mhm.
might be near the insectoid one we just talked about. But you've got several photos of this guy, and I think it's the 7 foot tall ones
Okay.
where they're all limbless, and there's like one, two, three, four, five to seven dark ones surrounding this very large kind of white looking, almost robot drone entity. Tell me about that.
So this panel is part of a massive panel that is called the Great Gallery. The Great Gallery is located within an annexed canyon that is actually way outside of Canyonlands National Park, but it's of such historical value that the national park system actually annexed this canyon to give it the protection it deserves. Um, it's about an hour and a half south of Green River and about 2 hours west of Moab. And if you go during the spring or the fall, you can actually go on ranger-led hikes to go down to see it. And the great thing about going on that hike is that the ranger will stop at all of these other panels along the way, because that great gallery, as massive and as impressive as it is not the only thing down there. So it's really cool to get to go down and see all of this. But it ends up being about a 10-mile hike, and you're descending 800 feet down into this canyon, and then you got to go 800 feet back up. But when you get down there, you're met with something like 50 figures, and they are all at least 6 feet tall. They are all individually unique. They have their own heads. They have their own patterns in their bodies. No two look alike. And this panel that you're talking about in particular is off to the left in an alcove next to this long procession of figures, and it's known as the Holy Ghost panel. That's what the Mormon pioneers called it when they first saw it. And the Holy Ghost panel has the tallest figure of the group, which is the one you're talking about. It almost looks robotic. It has big square eyes in this crazy head with lines and embellishment. And he is 9 feet tall. He is a monster, especially compared to the others. And, the fact that he's surrounded by all these other dark figures is really interesting, because the other figures don't really have discernible features. And that panel, they have said, is probably like 800 to 2,000 years old, according to the newest dating that they've been trying to do to it. But yeah, the Holy Ghost panel is also unique because that figure is one of the only depictions of any kind of dimensionality in rock art in Utah. So the fact that his head, you can kind of see the sides as well as the eyes, is a really rare and unique thing. He was obviously of great note and, got special attention from the artist when they made him, but that entire area is just mind-boggling. It is something like 50 figures on this wall, and none of them have arms and legs. They are all just giant anthropomorphic spirit figures. Some of them have, round big bug eyes. Some have no eyes. Some have like long slits for eyes. And there's only one, figure on the panel that matches their size that has arms and legs. And, some archaeologists believe that he's the shaman that took the trip and met with all of these beings. Other people have depicted him as like a Cocopelli figure with a flute. He kind of looks like he's blowing on a flute, but he's not. This staff of whatever he's holding is actually like piercing through his chest and going out the other side. Um, so I don't know that I believe that he's a flute player, but it's likely to me that he is probably the shaman that experienced the trip and then made the art. Um,
Yeah, fascinating because like if the dark colored figures are 6 feet, this guy must be 7 to 8.
he's 9.
Oh, he's 9 feet. Okay, so you've
He's
got a
9.
9 foot tall. I
He's
mean,
the
that
big
must be
one.
okay because the picture alone is fascinating to look at. I can't imagine walking up and realizing this is literally larger than life, 9 feet tall. And it literally, like you said, it's got a 3D head. You can see the sides.
Hmm.
It looks robotic. And one of the guys next to him is floating off the ground.
Hmm.
There's so much going on here that, and again, how far would this be from Skinwalker Ranch?
So the Barrier Canyon stuff is probably highway wise, it's probably a 4-hour drive between those. But as the crow flies, I want to say it's like 200 miles. So Barrier Canyon is kind of its own deal. It's down in the very central deserts of Utah, and it's very much confined to the canyons, the Red Rock canyons of that area. Um, and the Desert Archaic people that were there were still very nomadic. They weren't a culture that was planting down roots yet. That didn't happen until later when people started actually becoming agricultural. So they weren't there the entire time. They kind of moved around and did things. Uh, but that area just has nothing but anthropomorphic art. When you get into the Fremont culture and when you get into the basket maker and the ancestral Pueblo and stuff, it is a lot of fertility panels and depictions of sex and uh, sheep and big hunts and, depictions of rain and things where the tribe was obviously celebrating stuff that was part of its everyday life. But the anthropomorphic stuff in Barrier Canyon art is almost always and only these giant spirit figures that either don't have eyes or have giant bug eyes. And there's really nothing else like it.
That's fascinating. You said the Mormon pioneers called it the Holy Ghost panel or the Holy Ghost figure.
Hmm.
Wow.
So they
That's like,
likened it to, the Holy Trinity,
yeah,
God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost.
yeah.
That's kind of what the lens that they saw it through. So that's what it's called when you look it up in the books.
Well, Abby, I want to respect your time. This has been a fascinating interview. To everybody watching or listening, you definitely want to follow Abby on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, go follow her account. I think it's at Abbie Warnock-Matthews, correct?
Mm-hmm. Warnock, and then Matthews has 2 T's, and Abbie is Abbie. It's
Yeah,
a
so
long one.
follow her. She's got great photos. She's putting out some great reels. We collaborated on a reel with this Bigfoot figurine, so check that out. I think it's got over 100,000 views by now already.
It's a
Um,
popular one.
yeah, Abby, is there any other way people can follow you and follow your photography?
So I did make a point to upload all of my rock art to my print page. The my day job is outfitting offices with landscape wall art. So that's what I'm doing 9 to 5 during Monday through Friday. But I've had a lot of people request that I upload the rock art to there because there are other rock art nerds that just want nice prints of this stuff. So people are more than welcome to go there to see everything as well. You don't have to purchase it if you don't want, but you can definitely check out, big high res versions of all of this rock art that I've been photographing throughout the Southwest. And my website is just abbiematthewsphoto.com, AbbieMatthews photo.com. So that's also a great resource to be able to go and check out all that rock art.
Yeah, if you're able to go to abbiematthewsphoto.com, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And purchase one of these high res, amazing panoramic photos of these petroglyphs that we're talking about. Do you have the Bigfoot guy on there too?
I do.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go check that out then.
It's pretty
Um,
great.
Abbie, any parting words for us before we call this an interview?
One thing that I really am always hyper aware of when I talk about this stuff is the fact that rock art is beautiful, rock art is inspiring, rock art is amazing, but it's also very vulnerable. And I think that is probably part of the reason that a lot of this stuff hasn't been talked about on a bigger stage, is that once you get into the field and you start looking at this stuff, you become protective of it. And you are afraid of anything to happen to it, because there are quite a few vandalized panels, throughout this nation of ours, from people who don't know better or who have animosity about it or who knows what. So I would probably tell people, if you do go to these panels and you go to visit, please be respectful. The oils in your hands can actually damage the desert varnish and the pictograph pigment that these were created with. So please refrain from touching them, even just with your hands. Obviously, don't add your own stuff to the panel. Don't be disrespectful. And a lot of this stuff is actually located on national monument or national park land, where if you are caught vandalizing it, you're looking at massive fines and possible prison time. So I would also advise people to just be aware of that. But, it's special. It's still sacred to the descendants of these people who do still exist in this country and, hold ceremonial rituals at some of these places and hold these panels in very high regard. So if you're going to go see it, please go see it. Tell people it exists. Let people know it's out there. I want people to know it's out there. But just make sure to be very careful and respectful when you go, and leave no trace.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, the prison time alone is enough to make me not want to.
Seems like a really lame reason to go to jail.
Well, Abbie, again, thank you so much for your time. This was great, and look forward to seeing more of your photos and videos on Instagram and elsewhere in the future.
That'd be great. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much.